have two luminaries in that field. To my left and your right is Khalil Ferguson with United Core Alliance. And then to my right is Graham Farr with Glass House Brands. And I'll quickly introduce them. So Khalil currently serves as the Deputy Director for the California Equity Policy Council and is also the President for the United Core Alliance. The UCA's purpose is to eliminate the pervasive barriers to entry in the cannabis industry. The UCA aims to change policies precipitated by historical, political, and social sanctions that unjustly targeted communities of color. Under Khalil's leadership, the UCA has been instrumental in helping the city of Sacramento in forming its cannabis equity policies. Recently, the city added 10 additional permits specifically for drug war-impacted communities. Additionally, Khalil was integral to the establishment of the California Cannabis Equity Grants Program, which has provided over $60 million in grant funding to jurisdictions throughout the state of California. Through the CPEC, Khalil secured $60 million He also serves as the Secretary for the Democratic Party Black Caucus Legislative Committee. Our current bill package has approximately 20 bills covering the areas of education reform and financing, public safety, drug policy, housing development, environmental justice, and legal reform. Khalil focuses on strategies for combating gentrification and supporting inclusive economic development programs, and that's resulted in appointments to the Cities of Sacramento's Measure U Tax Oversight Committee and the City Manager's Inclusive Economic Development and Investment Committee. Khalil holds BA degrees in International Relations and Economics from Cal State Sacramento, and he's currently an incoming student at McGeorge School of Law. And congratulations and my condolences as a future law student.
Thank you, thank you.
Okay, you can't read mine after his. I'm gonna look not very good. He's got too many accolades. I started Glass House Farms. I love cannabis. My name's Graham. That's all the introduction you really need from me.
Fantastic. And then my name's Omar, and I've been practicing cannabis law for more than 23 years. I've defended hundreds of cannabis growers, many successfully, many dismissals, saved us taxpayers tens of millions of dollars. And now I lead a boutique law firm along with Lauren Mendelson that focuses on cannabis business law. And so we basically pivoted from trying to help people escape their nightmares to helping them achieve their dreams in the cannabis space. And it's an honor to be here. And this is the very first California Pavilion at the State Fair, and hopefully there's going to be an annual thing, and we'll see more.
Yeah, thank you, Omar. That's the real drug warrior right there, is the guy fighting to keep people out of jail. So thank you for everything you've done there.
You're welcome. So I'll start with a question for Khalil. You have been an activist and advocate in Sacramento and in the Bay Area for some time now. What are trends you are seeing in policy solutions to support Black and brown communities that are also prevalent in the cannabis space?
Thank you, Omar. Between housing, economics, and cannabis, there's really an intersection, especially in the legal field. We jumped into the expungement work because we realized that expungements and possessing a criminal record, of course, for black folks and black and brown people in these communities that have been disproportionately targeted by the war on drugs, has suppressed economic mobility, has hindered and probably exacerbated the education gap, because if you have a criminal record, even as low as little as cannabis, you still can't get into certain colleges because of the background check. So having disproportionate rates of arrests for black and brown communities can result in having a higher percentage of black and brown folks in the lower class can't access education. Actually, the social equity assessment for San Diego came out, and there was a higher arrest rates in the southeastern area of San Diego, while also in that same area, if you do an overlay map, they had a lower rate of BA degree attainment. So there's very much an intricate relationship and an inextricable relationship between the war on drugs targeting some of these communities, the lack of housing, the higher rates of homelessness that are prevalent in the black community, while having a lower rate of the population, that connected cannabis and having a higher rate of amount of arrest in the urban cities while also being less represented in the business industry as well as some of the ancillary and professional industries and in the academic space as well. So it's all intertwined with regards to our socioeconomic factors.
And what precipitated your interest in cannabis?
Really, it started with the economics, as I mentioned, in the expungement piece, and realizing that, of course, it's easy to, get a cannabis record based on the laws that we had passed previously prior to Prop 215 and Prop 64, and even actually have some data here that our Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor said that even if you're innocent, you will now join the 65 million Americans with an arrest record with, and experience the civil death of discrimination by employers, landlords, and whoever else conducts a background check. So that hindrance in the ability to, not allow black and brown folks who have been disproportionately impacted not get a higher education, not get, their higher economic mobility. And that relationship to the expungement piece and the legal aspect was very interesting from an economic perspective.
Thank you. And now a question for Graham. What was your first experience with cannabis, and how did you get into the industry?
Sure. So I think my first experience with cannabis was probably long before it should have been. I was very young. I took a little break from that and then went back to it in high school. And one of the things I found was that the war on drugs and the way that they treated it was black and white, right? This was horrible. Good people don't do it. And what my experience was, it actually made me a better version of myself. It made me my friends. We laughed. We had a good time. Nobody got in fights. No one had drunk driving. No one got had sexual assault issues. Those are all things that are associated with alcohol, which we put on a pedestal, and cannabis is the opposite. It makes the world a better place. And once I kind of saw that crack, I realized that the rest of what they were saying was bullshit too. And then from there, I had my first grow in a small closet, 6 square feet in college. Loved it. Loved the technology.
Where was that in college?
It was I was in 1996 at CU Boulder in Colorado. So before they'd legalized there, it was actually still when you'd go to the hydro store and you'd pay in cash and you'd park around the block and you'd do 2 laps around before you went to your car. You were still very legitimately hiding, but I really loved it. I loved the technical side, I loved the biology side, and I loved the product that came out of it. And for me, it became, first it was a hobby just for myself, and then I realized at the time you could sell it for $4,000 or $5,000 a pound. So now it was a business as well. Came back, I did a lot of tech work, but on the side, first it was a garage, and then it was a room, and then it was a house, and then it was multiple houses. And then about 7 years ago, we started Glasshouse Farms. Our first greenhouse was 150,000 square feet. Felt like the biggest thing in the world. Then we got another farm that was 350,000 square feet. Again, felt like the biggest thing in the world. This was right as Prop 64 was going into effect, and the rest is history. And now it's all I think about. But that and my kids is basically what I do all day, every day.
Fantastic. All right. A question for Khalil. What are some obstacles that you have observed facing cannabis equity entrepreneurs and communities still recovering from the war on drugs?
As we all know, cannabis is not cheap to get into, and being from communities who are impacted by the war on drugs and not having the economic mobility, not having the access to resources, our communities are already resource deprived, so being able to access the resources necessary to get into the industry is still a burden. But even after you start to peel the layers back, that educational component of being able to put together a business plan, being able to navigate the compliance space on your own without being able to have an attorney or a consultant is difficult. So even that knowledge of even where to go and do the research for our communities is hard. So it's very layered. So on top of the access to capital that we all know is required to get into the industry, the educational achievements, some of the educational knowledge to be able to even put together the professional portfolio, a pitch deck, some of the things that are necessary to even attract investors is hard for equity entrepreneurs because of that lack of education that we still have to do, which is why these equity programs are important to help provide consultants, help provide some of these discounted rates for access to these very high cost consultants and lawyers and things of that nature, and CPAs, access to insurance. We know banking is still a problem for all of us. So all of these are compounded on top of being able to navigate the complex regulatory, and then we add on the taxes. So once you're even able to get to market, as we all know, even as an equity entrepreneur, it's hard to stay in the market because the tax burden of having a small business, and we know California doesn't really support small businesses in the first place. So being a small equity business in the cannabis space isn't easy at all. So being a black and brown entrepreneur who are still trying to overcome some of the circumstances that were created by the war on drugs, it's very hard to get over that mountain.
Thank you. And the question for Graham, why do you think sustainability and social justice are important?
Yeah, sure. So we spend a lot of time at Glass House focused on sustainability. We're big fans of sun-grown cannabis. One of the, I think, the beautiful things about being in California is we have the perfect climate for growing cannabis, right? And in many other states, they throw away everything that Mother Nature gives you, go into a warehouse, and spend huge amounts of fossil fuels to reproduce basically what we get for free in California with 330 days of sunshine and 72 in sunny weather. So being here in California is the right place to grow it. We really like the idea of growing plants where plants grow well. We use greenhouses because we think it's a really nice hybrid of working with Mother Nature, but also polishing and supplementing to get the highest quality possible. We've done a number of sustainability reports. One of the things that we found when we did a study is that we produce in our greenhouses, for every gram grown, we produce 1/27th the carbon dioxide that you would on an indoor grow. We use 1/10 of the electricity. Greenhouses are also phenomenally water efficient. They use somewhere between half and a tenth of the water of growing outside because they can control the climate. Then we take that further. We capture the water, we sterilize it, and we recycle it. So it's literally as water efficient as you could be. We've got a megawatt of solar panels, so our greenhouses themselves are even powered by the sun. And I think the reason it's so important is the entire industry comes from the plant. And the plant comes from the planet. And if, it's hard for me to say this is the best weed in the world if that weed is ruining the planet at the same time. So we have the opportunity to create an environment that's built on sustainability and compassion, both for the people and the planet. And on the social justice side, we do a lot of work with Mission Green and Weldon Angelos, getting people, no one should be in prison for a plant. I mean, that's one of the other things, right? I think we all know at this point that the war on drugs was never really a war on drugs. It was a war on some drugs and some people, right? And that's bullshit. And you can go back and read the quotes if you haven't with Harry Anslinger and those things. I mean, they did it, what they did specifically. And now we need to stop making that problem worse. Biden administration arrested 25% more people last year than the year before that. So we're far from done, but we are making some progress. Weldon Angelos just had an event with his Mission Green Foundation that Kyle, my partner, is on the board of directors of in Washington on Wednesday, and it's an expungement fair. They presented a whole list of pardons. Finally, we see Biden actually talking about some stuff, saying things last week even that no one should be in prison for a plant, which we 100% agree with. And I think collectively as an industry and as a company and as people, we want to keep the pressure up to make sure that happens because this industry is riding on the backs of a lot of people's pain and suffering, and we need to connect the flywheel of the success we're building to undo some of those wrongs and make things better for the future.
Thanks. All right, a question for Khalil. I understand you have an expungement clinic. Which the UCA has been operating going on 2 years now. What led you to get into this work, and why is it important for the cannabis industry to support efforts such as expungements?
I mentioned how I got into this work earlier as it relates to the economic part of the intersection between the law and economic mobility. But even more so, the California legislature has been working for years to pass bills to clean up the war on drugs. So the war on drugs is more than just, helping to change the law and the lives of folks who have been impacted and get them out of jail. That is important, but even small things like the fines and fees that result from the legal system that have been incurred on folks that impact low-income folks. So there's been a number of bills that have passed over the past 3 years related to getting rid of fines and fees that are affect low-income communities. There have been a multitude of bills over the past 3 years, like AB 1793, passed by Rob Bonta before he became the Attorney General, that was supposed to automatically clear all cannabis convictions. And while we've cleared about 170,000 eligible ones, there's still 30,000 that remain that we're still working on a bill by now. Mia Bonta, his wife, is getting through the legislature. So there's many things like that we still need to do. There's also ones that are indirectly related to cannabis charges, and other ones like Prop 47 that address possession of certain drugs that are not cannabis but would have had and also been in the environment of cannabis and drug usage during the war on drugs as well. So now we're having laws passed like SB 357 that relates to loitering, and now you're able to expunge loitering convictions. So everything related to this punitive nature that we've had in California and the U.S., because California is leading the charge. Some states and their judicial systems don't even have expungement options in their legal system. The feds, you still can't even, expunge a record on the federal level. And certain state offenses you can't expunge from your record. So we still have a lot to do.
And in those states, the only remedy is to get a pardon from the governor or from the president if it's a federal crime.
Exactly. That's more of a mercy. It doesn't really remove that record from, that doesn't remove that record, that blemish from your record, and you can still be held liable, or you can still be discriminated against because of that record. So there's important for the industry, if we really care about addressing the war on drugs, to invest more in these efforts to ensure that the rights of folks are restored from this punitive, war that we lost.
Thank you. No, I think, okay, good. Okay, question for Graham. What does Glasshouse focus on to be sustainable?
That's a good question. So I mentioned some of those things, that we start with greenhouses, so we grow under the sun and leverage what Mother Nature gives us, and work in partnership with her instead of kind of in opposition. We have a number of things that we do. We recapture all the water, we sterilize it, we reuse it. We have things like roof washing robots that keep the windows clean, because the more light you get, the more you can get from the same inputs. We have a megawatt of solar panels, so we use the sun to run our greenhouses during the day. We have a cogens on site so that we can make power to run our facilities. In the production of the power, you get two things that are usually wasted. One is heat, and the other is CO2. At the greenhouse, we can use both of them. We capture the heat to warm water and then use that to climate control the greenhouses, and we capture the CO2 and inject it into the greenhouses, where the plants breathe it like we breathe oxygen, and then they exhale out oxygen. So they basically act as a catalytic converter, converting what would literally be a greenhouse gas back into something that's good for the planet, and making themselves stronger and healthier and more potent, bigger buds at the same time. So it's one of the things I like to focus on, called I call it the triple bottom line, which is it's good for the planet where we live, it's good for our consumers because they get a product that's better and more affordable, and they can feel good about. It's also good for our business because we're not wasting things, which allows us to run a more sustainable business as well.
Fantastic. I have a question about, there's now a trend towards organic food, organic products, and California has now approved, I think, what may be the nation's first organic certification for cannabis.
Yep.
Washington State tried it, but it kind of stalled out. And so do you have any plans for organic?
Yeah, so for those who don't know, there is no organic certification for cannabis because organic is a federal program, and of course they say that we're the devil, and so they won't certify it. So California came up with a program called OCal, which is a organic equivalent that is applicable and can be used for cannabis.
Yes, it's comparable to organic
right.
is the technical term.
Yeah, comparable to organic. It's called OCal, and I think it's great. I think consumers care about that stuff. One of the things I do think is a little bit unique about cannabis, and I think most consumers, when they think about organic, they're thinking about, is this food clean to eat or consume, and how is it for the environment, right? And one of the great things about cannabis is it's tested, and so that pesticides aren't being used on it, right? So one of the big things that consumers worry about is what pesticides are used here is actually not really even an issue with cannabis, because the testing is so stringent, almost nothing's allowed on it, right? 66 different pesticides down to parts per billion level. It blows organic. Organic looks like it's pulled out of the gutter compared to the testing that we do for cannabis, which is kind of, it's an interesting and somewhat ironic situation that, when someone dies of an E. coli contamination on lettuce, the person dies first, and then they go do the research to figure out where it came from. In cannabis, every 50-pound batch that we ship is tested for E. coli, aspergillus, mycotoxins, heavy metals, 66 pesticides before it leaves, before it even goes to the consumer. So it's a very high bar. The other thing is, we the way that we grow hydroponic, which is a tough for organic, because organic is typically soil and it's different. So it's an interesting thing, because everything we use is OMRI and organic certifiable, but we wouldn't technically make the organic certification because we are hydroponic. So I think it's great to see all of that. Anything that benefits the consumer is awesome.
Thank you. And question for Khalil. How can the industry do more to support efforts by CEPC and the UCA?
Yeah, I think, as I mentioned, just more collaboration. I think the more we collaborate and work together to achieve some of the goals, as stated, as being able to repudiate or to get rid of all the policies and the circumstances created by the war on drugs. The more we collaborate, the faster we can get to it, and the more we can get rid of some of these regulations and some of these taxes that impact us. For example, this legislative year between the CEPC, the Ledge Caucus and some of our partners like Origins Council and the folks in Mendocino as well as Emerald Triangle, we were able to get rid of the cultivation tax and even reduce the tax rate for the excise tax rate for equity folks from 15% to 12%. So, we know we're overtaxed, and if it's not for collaboration, we're in silos, and it doesn't work well to operate in silos. So the more we can support each other and collaboratively work on our efforts, because at the end of the day, it's really us against right now the regulatory environment that is California and the federal government. So the more we can do that, work together, collaboratively, whether it's however that looks, just more of that it would benefit all of us as well.
Yeah, less taxes, more retail. We're overtaxed, we're overregulated. I think as California Norml says, prohibition's not over until we have all of our rights, and right now we're a long way from having that, so we got to keep pushing.
All right, and then Graham, you got a pretty good question, which is why do you think it's important to have cannabis as part of the first ever state fair?
Yeah, so thanks to everybody for being here. I think that this is awesome in many levels, right? Seeing the number of people coming through here, I heard one estimate that it might be as many as 100,000 people. It's not your normal cannabis crowd, right? And I think that's really important, that branching out and seeing this right next to the arts and the candy maze for the kids and the ag over there, right? There's a great shirt that cannabis is ag, right? Cannabis is likely California's #1 cash crop, right? And it's way past time that we assume our place. We deserve a seat at the table. We belong at the table, breaking down the stigma. I think the state did a great job with this, really paid a lot of respect to the plant, did it in the right way, SC Labs and the phytofacts and the terpenes and the awards. But I think really it's the fact that it's normalizing the relationship we have with the plant. It should not, people walking around with a beer, cannabis should be just as normal, right? And this is where it starts. Hopefully next time we'll be able to have consumption as well. But the first step in the door is here and making it a normal part of California life like it should be.
And what are your thoughts on why is it important to have cannabis part of the discussion at the state fair, as well as the issues we're talking about, like equity and social justice?
One thing, so same thing that Graham mentioned, this is a first-time event, so this kind of, to an extent, not necessarily normalizes, but we have the conversation. So folks are walking around asking, I thought you're providing samples. No, we can't provide samples because we know what the regulation currently says. So now as we have more of these, maybe not next year, we know how California government is with regulation and bureaucracy, but maybe 3, 4, 5 years from now, as we work with the city of Sac, we work with the county of Sac and DCC and the state government to get more regulations, we get more event licenses, but we change the policy between equity folks as well who have support and the industry as well. We can have more events like this to where we're having a more nuanced conversation about what cannabis looks like. Like literally, if you walk down by the food courts, you can walk into the Coors Light beer area, and there's children right in that same vicinity, or even out there playing with the cornhole while they're consuming beer right there and alcohol. So I'm like, why to an extent can we have that same type of proclivity and characteristic for cannabis, but we know that the lobbyist costs, beer has been lobbying since Prohibition, since 1920, or alcohol overall, and they were in the same predicament. We're only really into 4 years of actual legal businesses being able to operate. That's post Prop 215 recreationally. So we're still 4 years into our Prohibition ending, and we still have a lot of ways to go. And I guess alcohol hit their 100th year, so it makes sense why they're so normalized, and they paid a lot of money for those lobbyists to change the laws. So invest in your lobbyists, and we can have this conversation a lot quicker and begin to have that on-site consumption in cannabis.
What do you see as possibilities for cannabis at the California State Fair, just so that we can start envisioning the future that we want to live in?
Well, I think the place that we should get to is cannabis should be treated, if anything, it should be treated the same as alcohol at the bare minimum, right? If we look at the harms and the dangers of alcohol, it far surpasses anything with cannabis. As Khalil said, out there, people are walking around with beers, and yet you've got to be 21 to come in the door just to talk about this, right? There's not even any product in here. So, where I'd like to see us get is that cannabis is treated just as much a part of society and as alcohol is. At a minimum, that a healthy relationship with cannabis, just like with alcohol, is expected, and the norm that we teach our kids that are young. It's not for them yet, but as you get older, it's a choice that you can make. It's medicine for many, something again you can't say about alcohol or cigarettes or all kinds of things that are very normal. So I don't think we've been people have been buying cannabis since the price was going to jail, right? We've made it to here. We're not quitting. We're not going away, and we shouldn't be happy until cannabis is just as normal as anything else we do in life.
And then Khalil, like looking at the future, in a future where we've expunged a lot of the convictions and, lower the barriers to entry, what kind of like possibilities do you imagine for the state fair and cannabis?
I really don't know. I think that's the interesting about cannabis is that we have the ability to be so innovative with it, and you have folks who are already are pressing the lines in the gray areas with regards to the confines of the law, what we're able to do. But those are the ones who are taking that risk to keep moving the cannabis industry ahead. So we already have, kind of to an extent, the normalization of topicals and the use for medicinal properties for seizures, for eczema. Just the way we can go and diversify the industry, specifically in here, where we have different, applications of cannabis. But overall, for the industry, we can, the sky's the limit to an extent for cannabis. Given that we're so new, and the regulation is so new, and the market to an extent is so new, and we've lost out of hundreds of years of research because of prohibition. So who knows? We'll see where we're at next year. But again, consumption may not come for a while.
All right, and we're almost out of time. Can I see real quick? Oh, we're 3:30? Perfect. Well, we have time for questions and answers after the two speakers share their last words, if you want. Like if you have a closing statement, and we'll start with you, and then we'll go to Cleo.
Sure. Yeah. So I would say thanks to Cal Norml. Thanks to the DCC. Thanks for the Cal Expo. Thanks to you guys. Thanks for everybody for coming. I think we're collectively, society moves when we all move together. So it takes all of us to do our piece and normalize it, to be upfront about it, to be open about it, to act, like what the reality is, which is that cannabis is a good thing. It makes the world a better place, and we all need to do our part to move that ball forward, right? There's a great quote, Martin Luther King Jr. used to say, the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice. And I think we're on that path, and we're on that arc, and we keep bending it together, and we'll get where we're going to go and make the world a better place in the process. So thanks, everybody, for coming.
I'll get to you in a second, right? Omar, I'll get to you. Yes. So I'll do my closing remarks. We'll begin opening up. But again, as Graham said, thank you to everyone for coming. Thank you, California Norml, the COLAs, DCC, as well as City of Sac and the State Fair. Thank you to OCM, one of our sponsors, for our expungement booths, for having us this year. We've been a good partner. But I really want to refocus on the fact that we still need a lot of equity in this California cannabis space. When we passed Prop 64, there was no equity language or no support for folks who were impacted by the war on drugs. We're doing a lot of cleanup here in California, whereas if we look at the state of Connecticut, who has equity within their state legislation, equity is still a forethought. So let's still focus on that. We still don't have any black or brown-owned dispensaries here in Sacramento. We're still working on that. Those are coming online, but so we still have a lot to catch up on to have equality and parity, but we need to use equity to get to equality in the cannabis space. So I just want to leave that with everyone, and we can begin opening up for questions and answers. Thank you.
So as we see the House write a bill for federal regulation, as we see the House put the bill forward for federal regulation, what do you, especially Graham, you got 5 million square feet of greenhouse? Like, what do you see for California if we go federal, where we have interstate commerce?
I think California is going to absolutely explode, right? I think I'd be surprised if you have a favorite non-Mexican tequila brand. Champagne comes from France. For most people, cannabis comes from California, right? We are the breadbasket. We're the culture. We live in the future. We've got the biggest market. We've got the most discerning market. I mean, a little stat. In Florida, they just legalized BHO, right? Like, people in Florida just started smoking shatter, right? I don't even think you could get that in the door of a dispensary in California, right? That was 3 or 4 years ago. That's where they're just starting, literally last month, right? So California is where the culture is for many things, but cannabis in particular. I think 8 out of 10 brands will come from California. It has the best growing climate out there, and it's a place where consumers across the country, frankly across the world, will pay a premium for cannabis that comes from California, right? You can see what people want before they can have it. It's the illicit market, and what they do, they smuggle California cannabis into other states where cannabis is legal. That's how bad they want it. I just did a tour of New York, and there's unlicensed dispensaries all over the Lower East Side. They're amazing. They look just like California. Walked in and asked them, what do you think about California cannabis? California cannabis is the best. It's all we sell. That's what every single one of them said. So when the walls do come down, and I do think they will, it's unlikely that cannabis will be the only CPG product that you can't ship between states, right? Like, you're not going to have your favorite Wyoming wine. Of course not, right? It's going to be Napa in California, wine in Wyoming and in New York. When that happens, I think the California cannabis market is going to be on fire. I think the guys in Humboldt are going to be shipping their 8s for $80 a piece. I think we're going to be trying to put, our brands on the shelves of every store of every state in the country. Like, 95% of wine comes from California. There's a reason for it. Cannabis is exactly the same.
Before we even get there, there's a lot of steps because we know Schumer and the Democrats have introduced legislation in the House that gets passed, and there's all the uproar and there's the hype on both sides about it being negative and positive because we know the Democrats are going to have an added tax to that. The tax has been ranging between 8 to 20%, and we just spent how many years trying to get the cultivation tax down, and our excise tax rate is at 50%. Do we want to add an additional 8 to 20% tax from the feds onto our products? So while cannabis legalization at the federal level is coming, it's what's it going to look like? Right now, it's very interesting to look at the political climate and that we're seeing with the Supreme Court meaning 6-3 conservatives and restoring, more of the states' rights, that it's looking like the states' rights battle is going to come back in at least our political, our legal scheme of the United States. So we'll see maybe the Republicans who would control if they control the Senate and the House will eventually deschedule it. And if they deschedule it, now we have access to banking. We have access. We could get rid of the 280E labor rule, and now we can actually begin to get IRS deductions from the operating the business and operate like a normal business and begin to actually see cannabis as a normal as it should be a normal business entity that's a commodity market to make money with. So we have a long ways to go before we actually have any bipartisan support on how to approach cannabis legalization at the Fed level.
Yes, so I think if federal legalization happens, you're going to see big tobacco, big alcohol, big pharma try to jump into the cannabis market, and they're probably going to fail, like all the Chads who failed before them. I think you're in agreement with that. And, I think what we'll ultimately see is California cannabis will be the premier cannabis anywhere on earth when people are looking for the finest cannabis, as soon as we unlock interstate and international commerce. And California has already put in place regulations for appellations of origin, and this is for sun-grown cannabis that's planted in the ground and is really like an expression of the place. But that choice to make it a terroir-based appellations process is going to mean that in the future, California cannabis is going to be as distinctive as tequila from the tequila region of Mexico, or champagne from the Champagne region, or it's going to be like something that's like an ultra premium product. And I know many craft farmers are hanging on for dear life, waiting for that day when they can finally do interstate and international commerce. But I know that the demand is incredible. I was recently in New York, and like you're saying, like the illicit market is kind of like an indicator of consumer preference, because they pivot immediately. If it ain't selling, they ain't selling it. And so it's really interesting that California products are still considered top-notch. They had smuggled vape carts from California that here cost $40, selling for $80 on the street in New York. And I know that the demand for California products is going to be tremendous. So I think federal legalization will unlock international, interstate commerce, and really allow all the people who want to smoke or amazing cannabis access to it.
I think what's interesting even about that, even to build on, because you brought a very good point of interstate commerce. There's currently a bill, SB 1326, which promotes interstate commerce, and if passed, will allow the governors of different states to make agreements should the laws be similar to to have interstate commerce between their borders. So very interesting from a macroeconomic standpoint to see kind of free trade agreements begin to be established as we wait the federal government to do whatever the federal government will do. But states are already doing what we want to do, because we want cannabis, we want to be able to have our own economies. So it's interesting to see that form under the umbrella of the federal government.
Yeah, and I mean, let's be honest, we have interstate commerce, right? Like, California's feeding the rest of the country now. It's just not doing it in a regulated system. So eventually the consumers are going to get what they want. I mean, they're going to the New York example. Florida's a lot closer. They're not importing their cannabis from Florida, right? They're getting weed from California because that's what the consumer wants. At the end of the day, the consumer gets what it wants. So it will happen. Who knows what the path is, if it's going to be three-tier system like alcohol or what, but I'm confident that we will see these things happen. I mean, the Dormant Commerce Clause of the Constitution doesn't even actually allow it not to happen once federal legalization hits. So I think we're on a good path. It may be a long path, but we'll get where we're going.
Great question.
No, it's fine. I want Omar to talk about what is that book you're holding?
Oh, what is that book? This book is, This book is the yearly book that we publish at our law offices, which is California Cannabis Laws and Regulations. And people would always get on me. It's like, oh, why do you even bother writing the book? The laws are going to change next week and next month. But the whole reason is so that we have like signposts over years, and we can see how cannabis law has evolved. And so now these books, I got them at Stanford Law School, Yale Law School, because I'm hoping that legal scholars will like trace the evolution of cannabis law by like looking at how the laws change in the future. But look how many laws and regulations licensed farmers have to deal with. This is only at the state level. There's also all of the local municipal laws and regulations on top of that. And so this gives you an idea how regulated cannabis is the most regulated, one of the most regulated products in California.
Yeah, you definitely, strawberry farmers do not have a book of rules like that. I mean, we've got some examples. We bought one of our farms for 20 years. It was an orchid farm. The CDFA and the Department of Fish and Wildlife had never been to the farm once in its 20-year history. We had to have them out twice and pay them $10,000 before we could even get a license to plant a cannabis plant, right? So that's the difference in the spectrum between agriculture and cannabis. And again, prohibition isn't over until we have all our rights, and that's when cannabis is treated just like any other crop.
Quick question. How can a broke college student get one of those books? A broke cotton. Look, a closed mouth don't get fed. Thank you. Oh, yeah, please.
Any more questions? Any more questions? Oh, yeah, Sam.
How is hemp regulations impacting the consumer packaged goods markets, and how can Appellation controls in the international trade market protect our hemp product until the cannabis consumer packaged good market's available at the international trade?
Yeah, I mean, the hemp market is really like way less regulated than the cannabis market in California. So now we have, AB 55, which I think it allows hemp products to be like traded without like the same testing and the same regulatory requirements as cannabis. And so the appellations of origin is made for cannabis products. But we're seeing hemp knockoff versions of every cannabis product, so I wouldn't be surprised when we start seeing knockoff, hemp-based products on appellations. But I think hemp is really the same plant as cannabis, and this 0.03% arbitrary line that was just drawn, it's not based on human biology, it's not based on plant biology, it's completely made up and arbitrary. And I hope eventually that cannabis is just regulated like any other agricultural crop. California protects the right to farm for almost every single crop except cannabis because it's defined as an agricultural product, and it really needs to be redefined as a crop so that the right to farm, all of the protections for farmers fully apply to the cannabis industry. So in the long run, I hopefully will see cannabis alongside other crops in the state fair. Yep.
Here you go.
Thank you. This is kind of a comment, maybe more than a question for anyone in the audience who might not know this, but just to give it a comparison. So Omar and I, our office is in Sonoma County, and they allow both cannabis and hemp cultivation. And if you were trying to grow, let's say, a 30,000 square foot, so close to an acre cannabis farm. That could cost you at least $20,000 in application costs just at the local level before you get anything. Probably close to, if not more than $100,000 to get going. For the same amount of hemp, we're talking about $100 maybe over the counter type same day application. It is biologically the same plant. The definition now comes down to a distinction in the percentage of THC. So there's really no scientific anything behind this. It's the same plant, but they're subject to an entirely separate set of rules. One is legal to trade in interstate commerce, one is not. One you have to go through. Okay. Anyway, it's just like really interesting, and I think this is a fascinating topic, and I'm so excited that the state fair's had us. And you might see some plants over there in the back. Those are hemp plants because legally they couldn't have cannabis plants here. But it comes down to the percentage of THC. So in case you didn't know that.
Brian, do you want to close this?
About 2 minutes, Omar. Wrap it.
All right, any final questions? Well, Carla? No? Oh, okay. Well, thank you, everybody, for coming here.
Thanks for having us. I appreciate it. Thanks, everybody, for showing up.
Thanks for being here and being part of history.
First ever inaugural. We were here first.